I'm not, I tell everybody this and I'm not joking. Like I'm actively looking for a like accidental death policy because I know I'm going to piss off the wrong people with this. But guys, I am fully convinced that the only reason that we fall soil test is to sell you fertilizer.
This is an episode you do not want to miss. Let's get started. Welcome to the Soil Talks podcast. Today, we have Dr. Curt Livesay with us today. Thank you for joining us today. Definitely appreciate that. It's a pleasure to have somebody with such experience, knowledge, expertise with us today. You know, we met last year, or actually this year, earlier on in the year at the Commodity Classic. And we had great conversations. And at that point, I knew there was going to be something more to this. And that's why we wanted to bring Dr. Curt on today. I'd love to talk a little bit about just his professional background, what he's done, his education. He has a PhD in research methods and interpersonal communication, University of Iowa. Certifications, he's a certified crop advisor, as well as a licensed commercial pest control consultant. He does have some specialized training from the University of Vermont as well, cannabis plant biology, and also cannabis science and medicine. Those are two. He has tons of contributions to the agricultural industry as well that spans back to around 2012, I would say, or around in that time. Yield champions consultant on corn, soybeans, wheat, and sorghum. All of those. And he works with high yield growers like Kip Kohlers, and they set record breaking results continuously. He also has developed products. He has a couple of different businesses that he operates, Alchemy BioSciences, as well as Dynamite Ag. You'll find him in both of those places, developing products, changing the industry. And that's the exciting part about this. He has developed a product called Pixie Dust, which is a silica-based specialty fertilizer. I love the smile. It's great. Which basically helps with crop resilience and stress on the plants. His research focuses a lot on nitrogen efficiency, soil biology, and the bad and ugly of product formulation. I think that's a big thing today in this industry, and it's great that he's doing that. And he's definitely an industry leader as well. He's an ex officio board member of the Pacific Northwest Direct Seeding Association, and he frequently speaks at agronomy events across the entire nation. Does a little bit of consulting as well, precision fertility, using soil and tissue testing, prescription-based nutrient applications, not just we're going to throw everything out. It's a prescription. I like that.
Yep.
And then sustainable innovation. He implements data-backed solutions and reduces waste and environmental impact, and it increases profitability. So again, Dr. Curt, thank you so much for being on today. Hopefully we got everything. If you want to add anything now, please do.
I would just say, just 2 points of clarification. I used to be a licensed commercial pest control consultant, but that was when we lived in Washington State for 5 years. So I did let that go when we moved back to Central Illinois. And I am letting my CCA. I've been a CCA for 10 years. I'm going to let that expire this year. Just don't see the value in it, I guess anymore. The PhD is already done, so we're going to leave that alone. But I'm letting those two certifications go. So there's that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And is it just due to the fact that you just feel kind of like those programs maybe just aren't something that you want to hold on to? It's like, look, you know what? We're going to go a different route now, kind of look at things a little differently where it's not so structured. Is that kind of what it is?
Yeah, what it used to be, honestly, the CCA thing was I enjoyed getting the continuing ed credits because I was doing all this research all the time anyway, and you could submit your own, to say, hey, but I got to where I was just like, you know what? It's more trouble than it's worth to have to fill out the submission forms and all that garbage. So where I'm like, I'm just going to keep doing the research. I don't need the little pat on the back of myself. And part of that's an ADHD thing, right? Like you like the gamification. So it felt like I was kind of winning every time I was being rewarded for doing the research. And I'm like, doing the research is a reward enough in and of itself. So yeah, I didn't want to do the money grab, and I didn't want to have to continue with the paperwork.
No, that's great. That's wonderful. It's not like it's going to stop you just because you lose that certification, right? You're going to continue on doing what you're doing. So that's great. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. With Alchemy BioSciences now and also Dynamite Ag, are there products you're developing? What are you building now? What are you working on? Is it biologicals? Is it fertilizers? What are you doing right now?
Yeah, so everything that I do is really based on stress mitigation. And so I'm doing a series right now on TikTok called the 12 Days of Silica, because silica is I call it the OG stress mitigator, right? It's not a hormone. It's not a PGR. It's not getting into any of those things that are chemical in nature, I guess I would call it. But instead we're using, kind of like the way God did it. We're going to use something more natural to help that plant kind of regulate itself and get through stress. So everything that I build thus far has been about stress mitigation. and using silica as a base. And then what I've sort of branched into more recently is crop specific amino acids, because
Okay.
there's a lot of companies right now that are taking this sort of what I call like a shotgun approach. And it's like, oh, hey, here's a product that has amino acids in it, which for the record, usually this drives me crazy. So I'm going to go on a lot of soapboxes today. I hope that's okay. Or like
I
just kind
love
of
it.
rant a little bit. But like
Yes, please do.
a lot of these companies are just taking a byproduct from the feed industry, right? Because we're like supplementing and fortifying animal feeds with these amino acids. So they take the byproduct from these animal feeds and they're like, hey, we can label this as a nitrogen fertilizer and it works on every crop at every time. Let's go. And the research is really clear that if you put the wrong amino acid on the wrong crop at the wrong time, it's not like a neutral thing. Like you will go backwards. Like you can cut yield by doing that. And I'll tell you right now, free agronomy tip, guys. Do not put arginine on through a Y drop at V6 because you will signal to the corn plant that it's doing great on nitrogen. I've cut yield in 2 plots, 40 bushels an acre doing that. Like you've really
Wow.
got to pay attention to what you're doing. So instead, one of the things we did this last year was looking at boosting protein in wheat. And so our total yield range that we've got the data back on that was like +1 bushel to -1 bushel. But we consistently increased the protein by like 3/4 of a point
That's
where we
big.
applied the product. Yeah, because
Yes.
it's like you could almost get too myopically focused on what I'm trying to accomplish. So I was like, I should probably make this a little more broadly applicable because not everybody gets a premium for protein on their wheat. But it's just like what I like doing, Brandon, is I like finding like super niche problems and solving those for guys. So like the whole reason I even started on the silica thing back in 2012 or 2013 was because Scott Westine is a really good friend of mine. I actually met him, by the way, not at the Commodity Classic, but on the airplane on the way home from San Antonio. So I met Scott. We just struck up a conversation. I know, right? It was awesome. That was back, I think, in 2012 or whenever that one was. And we got to talking, and they have a ton of salt stress. They farm up in the Red River Valley up in eastern North Dakota. And I was working with some ag companies at the time, and nobody had anything to address this issue. So I was like, screw it. I'm a researcher. I'll figure it out on my own. And I
Yeah.
dove into the whole silica thing and was researching in the cannabis world. And like, everything just kind of clicked. And so I started building. That was where I started with silica. So it was just a unique problem on a farm that we then solved a problem, or I built a product to solve that problem. And we've grown exponentially since. So it's been a wild ride.
Man, no, that's great. And that's what I was going to ask you. I figured that silica research did maybe come from some of those certifications or some of the work you did in the cannabis and hemp industry, or probably cannabis. Actually, silica is a big deal in that industry and the utilization of it. So that's really neat that you're bridging that gap from a plant like that over into commercial ag or into agriculture. That's a wonderful thing. It's something like you said that nobody was producing, right? And
Yeah, no,
that's great.
it's been a wild journey, and kind of what I like doing is just taking the sciences and kind of getting this crosstalk that doesn't normally happen, whether that's taking something like my background in research methods and figuring out how to translate peer-reviewed science into farmer speak and making it useful for the grower, or taking something in, again, the cannabis space to the commercial ag. The only reason I ever worked in the cannabis space, for the record, was because we had built an established ag business, and there was a group that was wanting to focus on medical cannabis in Washington State that was looking for an agronomist, not somebody from the industry. So I came in as a total outsider, and we worked in, it was super cool. It was controlled environment agriculture. So it wasn't hydroponic, it was actually aeroponic, so, which is
Absolutely.
technically a subdivision or under that umbrella. But yeah, so I mean, you're talking about roots suspended in the air, getting a nutrient mist sprayed on them. I learned so much about, photosynthesis and carbon dioxide and oxygen and CO2. I mean, it was just, it was really cool. But then the whole point is like, can we take that and then apply what we're learning there and take it back to big ag, which is kind of what we've done.
No, that's amazing. And that PhD in interpersonal communication, that helps you big time, because sometimes that's the hard part is, right? Like you have guys that, really some of the stuff's very complex, and without being able to break that down and make it simple for some people to understand, that's where some of this actually never makes it to the field. Is due to the fact that people can't explain it, right, to a farmer or to a producer and say, hey, this is why we're doing this. So that's interesting. And then it's neat that you took that CEA, the controlled environmental agriculture, and now you're kind of saying, hey, I mean, I can see where you learned a lot, because there's no soil there. Like those plants are getting the nutrition put on their roots, being uptaken. So that's a really exciting thing too. Now you're just switching it over. So that's neat. So man, but the majority of your research, it sounds like kind of what your companies are based on is mitigating that plant stress, silica based. Do you have any biologicals that you're currently working on, or is it just strictly the silica side of things?
Nope, I'm staying out of biologicals. I actually stay out of micronutrients and NPK. Like, I really wanted to carve out a niche for myself because we have essentially no competition. And if any of your listeners are like, hey, I know of a silica product, that's true. There's some stuff in like, there's a really great product in the vineyard and orchard space So there's like, and again, cannabis, right? For sure, where they've looked at some different silica things. But in the space that I'm in, where we focus primarily on conventional agriculture, corn, beans, wheat, alfalfa, sorghum. There's really nothing in that space that has had any kind of efficacy. And we have a ton of independent third party data. Universities have looked at our stuff. Beck's Hybrids is a seed company in Illinois, Indiana, Midwestern seed company, where Beck's PF are proven. So, they do completely independent research. So we're very unique in that space. But yeah, I've stayed away from biology. I'll be skeptical, or I'll be honest, I am skeptical of bugs in a jug, not because I don't think they can work, because I know later in the podcast, we're going to talk about commercializing peer-reviewed science. I tell everybody all the time, I'm not that smart. That's just what I've done. But I think that a lot of companies, and it's not just the biology companies, a lot of companies overstate their claims. There's this disconnect between the R&D people and the marketing people. And what the R&D people are doing and doing good work and saying, like, you need to draw like, these parameters or this box around your claims. The marketing people are like, that's great, but it's not going to sell enough. So they go blow up the marketing claims. And there's just that like disconnect. And so for me, like, biology, you can absolutely make biology work in a couple places. As a seed treatment, where we're only trying to impact the spermosphere, which, yes, that is the technical scientific name for that little area right around the seed. Like residue or stock digesters, I think is another great case, another instance where they will work well. Worked with several companies that have done good stuff there. But when you start trying to make claims about impacting the biology, here's what drives me crazy, okay? Every sales pitch I've ever heard from a biology company, and I'm not picking on one, so if you're listening, don't be offended. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the industry. It always starts with, there's more life in this teaspoon of soil than there is, people on the planet, however many billions or gajillions of bugs. Okay, well, if that's true, if there's that many in a teaspoon of soil, how on earth are you going to claim to impact all of that biology with a pint or a quarter of anything per acre? Like that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like that seems like a losing battle. The research is clear that manure can impact biology. Long-term use of manure will change the biological profile or the microbial composition of those communities, those biological communities in your soil. Absolutely. But that's not a pint or a quart per acre. That's tons per acre. So now we're starting to like change what those communities look like. So long answer to a short question. No, I don't touch biology. I stay on the chemistry side of things with silica and amino acids. We'll occasionally put in, like in the protein product I was working on for wheat this last year, that amino acid product, I did have some manganese and some zinc in there for some data-driven reasons based on some data sets that we'd put together. But again, that was really more of like a stimulatory thing rather than like hey, we're going to throw a bunch of manganese and zinc at it. So yeah, I like being in my own little niche. The other thing is, when it doesn't take a lot of argument to point out that like NPK is not going to get commercial ag where they're wanting to go, right? Like Kip always used to say all the time, if all it took to raise 300 or 400 bushel corn and 100 or 150 bushel beans was more NPK, everybody would be there already, because that's what big ag has sold us. More NPK, all the flipping time. And and like we're increasing, but that's mostly due to genetics, right? So what happens is when you look at this, we know that the genetic potential is in the bag to raise. Russell Hedrick did 459 dry land. Hula's done over 600 irrigated. So if you start at that threshold, that's your cap, you've got to remember that everything that we do from the moment you crack the bag or the box of seed, we suffer yield loss. So your theoretical maximum yield potential continues to go down, right? It's this little like stair step down. And guys, you cannot regain yield at R3 that you lost at V3. Like you just can't. It just
doesn't work. Yeah.
It doesn't work, right? Like you're not adding bushels back. I tell guys all the time, there is no product on the market that can increase your yield. All we can do is decrease yield loss. All we can do is mitigate the stress that takes yield away. And you look at Iowa State has data on this, just tons of university. Like you can talk about waterlogging stress. You can knock the top third out of your yield potential with a week of standing water. Like that's university backed data. That's not me doing a sales pitch. So you could take it from 300 to 200 max potential with 1 week of water. You can take a 600 bushel corn crop down to the national average with 1 week of water and 2 weeks of heat at the wrong time. Like it's
really,
no
and that's
yeah.
Well, no, and that's what I see what you're saying now. That's that mitigation of stress. Like that's really what you're trying to do to make sure that those potentials get up there. And it's funny because we've been in the biological industry since 2008, right? And we've heard the same thing: bugs in the jug, snake oil. I've heard it all, right? And truthfully, I'll be honest with you, over all of these years, and that's really the core of our business. I'll be, just honest with you about it.
Yeah.
We've seen so many companies come and go because of those claims, because of what they claim they can do. And so the only way that we've seen that, biologicals really work and when they do work and things like that is at seed treatment, some foliars when we start looking at photosynthetic bacterias.
I can see that.
And then when we talk about first trophic level photosynthetics, right? Everybody wants to just throw spores in the soil and throw all this other stuff that's already there. And it's like, wait a second here. Why are you just selling them more stuff that's already in their soil? It's just not active, right? The soil ecology is not working at that point. And that could be from, stress. I mean, you name it. So it's interesting, and it's neat that you've niched yourself down. Like you're like, this is what we're going to focus on. And it's something that the industry needs. And it's really cool that you're doing it on those type of, row crops, commodity type of crops. It's something you're focused on, and that's wonderful. It's not like you're even at this point, really, it doesn't seem like going after these higher value crops, which you easily could do, right? But you've niched down. So, let's talk about, and I know it's something that you always love to talk about as well, as nitrogen efficiency, right? It's kind of what started all this. The rate versus timing versus placement, right? So where do growers really leave the most money on the table, would you say? Is it the rate, the timing, the placement, or the source? And what's the correction? What would you say, like, from your perspective? What are you thinking?
So the answer is yes. So I tell everybody when I do meetings, I'll be honest, I'm bragging about this. Okay. I was one of the very first dealers for 360 Yield Center. That's the company. Greg Souter is actually over here in Morton, not far from me at all. They're the company that has the Y drops. Now, he didn't invent those. He bought those from a guy named Dan Muff in Iowa and then sort of blew the company up. But they didn't come to me. I went to them because there's a study that was published back in 2000. It was either 6 or 9. I think it was 2009 by Kemper. It was like a master's thesis done at Oklahoma State University. And he looked at placement on top, like dribbled on top, placement distance away from the corn plant. And it just blew my mind. So I went to him, and I still have the email that I sent to Greg Souter in July of whatever it was, like 14, where if you've ever seen the 360 data where they're like hooking holes all the way across the row, that was my idea. And I can prove it because the way that we've always done soil sampling up to that point was you just go pull some from in the middle of the row, some between the stalks, and you make this composite and you send it off and it tells you how much nitrogen you need. Well, the problem with that, guys, is, okay, couple things. You can still come up with a composite on your own mathematically. If you pull individual samples and measure them individually, it will tell you where that nitrogen is concentrated. And one of the
100%.
biggest lies of agriculture is like, you put your nitrogen out there and it just kind of like flows through the soil, right? Like all groovy, like, and the roots are going to like, no, like, especially if you look at something like anhydrous, like an ammoniacal form of nitrogen, you put it in the middle of the row, it's staying in the middle of the row. The number one force that acts on our nitrogen is gravity. It's going to pull it down through the soil. Or if you have a real heavy, like clay soil, right, then we got to worry about like denitrification, right? Gassing off, whatever.
Absolutely.
So the point is, it's not flowing laterally like people think that it does. So, and if we really actually believe that idea of right source, right rate, right time, right place, right? Like I've always seen those as like, I think even the International Plant Nutrition Institute has that as like these puzzle pieces that are like all locked together, which implies that if you change one, it should change the other. So if I change my placement, I should be able to reduce my rate, especially if I change my timing. We do something like the Y drops. If we put it on later, closer to when the plant needs it, we can reduce the amount that we're going to waste. So we can use less when we put it on at the right time. We can reduce the amount when we put it on in the right place. And then obviously that impacts source because you don't want to go out there with an anhydrous knife and prune your roots. And I understand people are like, well, but if it's sitting on top, you got to worry about it, gassing off. Okay. But again, university data, guys, ammonium thiosulfate works every bit as good as like Agritane in BPT if it's 7 to 10 days. So if you're going to catch a rain or you've got irrigation, right? Like you can absolutely fix this. So yes, I wrote a white paper on this back in the day. I've worked with growers all over the US. The hardest part for me is the guys that farm in the real bad hill country, like with terraces. Then yeah, you're stuck looking at something like a nitrogen stabilizer, because you probably have to put it out there with like a side dress bar. It'd be about as late as you can get it. I get all that. In a perfect world for the guys that are farming the flat ground, I think we ought to be at about 0.4 pounds applied per bushel produced. And I know we're going to get into the grain nutrient removal here a little bit later, but I'm even at the point now where I don't know who to talk to, whether it's the USDA, the NRCS, whoever, but I have a way that we can quantify. And I think that we should be rewarding nitrogen use efficiency because we can prove it when we look at the grain nutrient removal. Like it's mathematical. Here's what I put on. Here's what I removed. And if you can get the removed equal to or greater than what you put on, you should be rewarded for that, right? Like I absolutely stand by that. Yeah.
Especially since the atmosphere is 76% nitrogen, right? Why do we need to put more back into the atmosphere and sell something to somebody and just basically make money off of them, right? And it's either being leached into the, potentially into the water or being volatilized into the atmosphere. And that's the thing. I agree 100% with you. I think that would be a great thing if they could do that for producers instead of putting laws in place where you can't use nitrogen. Let's just do it more efficiently. And then you're rewarded for when you're not overusing nitrogen.
I think the problem is we haven't done a good job of policing ourselves. And when we don't do a good job of policing ourselves, the government's going to come in. And honestly, I hate to say it, guys, but they should. But like, if we just do better, they won't have a reason to do it. But if we don't do better, they're going to have to. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, that's exactly it's just like the law of nature almost.
Yeah. Now we'll go ahead. We will move into the post-harvest removal testing. It's perfect. So it's like a perfect segue into it, the nutrient takeoff, right? So what's a test, how to interpret, like what do you look for? And, what should change in the next season, right? Fertility plan because of it. Like as we get into this, end of season comes. Do you take soil samples at the end of season post-harvest, or do we look at them in the springtime before the crop is actually planted? I don't know. I love it. Yeah. Tell me what you think, Doctor.
Okay. So I tell everybody this and I'm not joking. Like I'm actively looking for a like accidental death policy because I know I'm going to piss off the wrong people with this. But guys, I am fully convinced that the only reason that we fall soil test is to sell you fertilizer. 100%. Like think about the logic behind this, right? When is your microbial activity going to be, is it going to be going up or going down? It's going to be going down, right? As we start to get cold, we've pulled everything out of the field. The plant is no longer actively growing. The plant is putting out exudates when it's actually actively growing. So that ramps up your biological activity. So after we go out, we've harvested, that plant has shut down. We've reduced the biological activity in our soil. We are on the downhill slope of how much like nutrient or available nutrients we're going to have, how much biological activity is happening. If I wanted to sell you fertilizer, that'd be when I'd want to go out and take the test because it's going to look low, right? That's when it's going to look the lowest. And honestly, even in the spring, I'm not a huge fan of spring. Why are we testing it before the crop's out there? For me, if I'm on a soil test, I'd like to see it when the crop is actively growing. Mind-blowing like revelation here. Why wouldn't I want to see what the crop sees when the crop sees it? That just makes sense to me. And why would I want to use these traditional extraction methods? I wouldn't. I'd want to use something like a Haney test that's going to tell me what the plant actually sees, like an H3A extraction. So if I'm doing testing at all, which for the record, I've gotten so far away from soil testing just because we use it to sell people stuff and I don't like that. So I would do in-season Haney testing. That's what I would do. And then if we want to look at, well, hey, what's actively going on then as far as like, what do we take off? This is easy, guys. Like the universities have done a very poor job of this and an even worse job of advertising that they've done it. So like Minnesota has a data set of 15,000 data points gathered over 14 years where they looked at grain nutrient removal. So they go out and we think tissue sampling is synonymous with like leaf tissue. And that is, again, part of the industry trying to sell you stuff, guys. It's plant tissue. That means that the grain, like here, I have ears sitting on my desk. Okay. I just did a couple TikTok videos on this. That grain is a plant tissue. We can test that as a plant tissue. So that's what we do is we send these not the ears. You don't need the cobs. We just send the kernels off at the end of the season, right as you're harvesting. Okay. So like get out of the combine or out of the grain cart, take a coffee can, scoop it into a Ziploc baggie and send it off. I use Waters Ag Lab because they are very, very inexpensive. It's $18 per test and we get a full nutrient profile. And what's interesting, I tell guys this too, you're not an average. You're an individual data point from which those averages are drawn. So that big data set in Minnesota, there's one that has like 3,000 data points that University of Illinois did. Okay, well, all they're doing is they're taking all that data and they're averaging it out. And they're like, well, here's your removal rate, right? It's about 0.35 pounds of phos and about 0.25 pounds of K removed per bushel that you make. And it's like, okay, but if I have a hybrid or a variety or a ground that's different and I'm 20 or 30% lower than that, and I'm dead set on I have to replace my removal rate, which even that is a whole other can of worms, right?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Bad science too. But even if you're sold on that, like I'm going to meet you here and say, okay, let's pretend that that's a good idea. Then at least for the love of God, base it on your removal rate. Don't base it on the big data set. And what I've been working with guys on, and I've got like 120 data points now, is I am tracking, this is the other thing universities haven't done. I'm tracking the hybrid, the specific variety within that hybrid, history of manure or cover crops, the yield with the state where it came from. Like I'm trying to get as much data as possible so that then I can give that back to the growers, right? I'm anonymizing it. So I'm taking names off. But it'll say like, here's the state, here's the hybrid, here's the variety, here's the yield, here's the relative maturity. And guys can look at that. And it's not to be predictive, right? Like when we use a soil test, the assumption is I'm going to base my next year's fertility application on this fall's soil test. Well, guys, this isn't like a looking forward kind of a deal. This is a looking backwards kind of a deal. This is not a guess at the future. It's an analysis of what we've already pulled off. So there's no guesswork. You can say, if this was my removal rate and it was on this many acres and I produced this many bushels per acre, it's simple math. Take my removal rate times my yield times my acres, and that'll tell you exactly what you need to put back out there. And when I have a
100%.
spreadsheet,
That's perfect. I tell you, you know what? And I tell you what, it is simple. And you know, I like the idea too that you said just a little bit ago regarding, hey, why are we taking these before season, after season? Why aren't they being taken when plants are growing? Because that's when exudates are being actually produced by the plants, right? Which then at the rhizosphere of that root, they're cycling, they're saying, they're telling the biology, hey, this is what we need. This is what we're going to need to uptake. So I see exactly what you're saying. I mean, and then testing the grain itself, you know, you don't hear anybody doing that. I'll be honest with you. You know, it's tissue sampling, meaning like, let me tear this leaf off and send it in, but not the grain, not the actual produce that's coming from that to show you what's really nutritionally in that. And
yes.
I
Okay,
like that.
That's a big point that you just made. Okay. Like, here's the thing. Nobody likes talking about this, but let's talk about nutritional density. And I know you guys work with a lot of like organic growers, which is great for the record. And I'm going to tick off all the commercial ag guys. Like, when I can, I'm at the grocery store, I buy organic absolutely every time. I got young kids. I actually have a really rare form of cancer anyway. It's not serious. People confuse that with like serious. It's not. I've dealt with this for like 20, 25 years now. Okay. But it's persistent. It's still there. And it is one of the kinds of cancer. It's a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that comes arguably, allegedly, however you want to say this to cover both of our butts here from a liability standpoint. Okay. From contact with Roundup. This particular kind that I have. And it's like, you know what? If I can spend a couple extra bucks and buy organic and decrease, even slightly decrease my chances of making that worse or whatever, I'm going to do that. I'm going to take it and do that. But here's the other part of this that we need to pay attention to. All the people that get wound up about like, oh, you know, our food is not less nutrient dense. No, it absolutely is less nutrient dense than it used to be. And we can prove that through the grain nutrient removal thing. And I can show you in my data set that if you have a conventionally grown ear of corn versus one even that was conventionally grown but has used as integrated cover crops, for instance, okay, so what I would call green manure, the nutritional density, and I'm talking, and the way I'm operationalizing that, or that's the fancy science word for measuring that, is looking at like not just your NPK, but your microbes. So like what is in there, right? Because when you look at what is in that kernel of corn, right, you've got your proteins and your starches and the micronutrients and whatnot. A lot of it's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. And unfortunately, one of the ways that we increase our yield, right, is we push photosynthesis. And if you think of every kernel as a little pie chart, what we're doing is that the easiest way to expand that is not to add more zinc and more manganese or whatever. It's to add more starch, right? It's to drive photosynthesis. So photosynthesis will absolutely increase bushels, but it doesn't necessarily increase nutrient density. The nutrient density is going to come from carbon sources that we can get, like when we get our nutrients tied to carbon sources. That appears to, at least based on the data that I've seen and everything I've read, that's what we're seeing. So again, I love
so
manure.
like humics, fulvics, things like that. Yes. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like humic acid, fulvic acid. And it's funny you say that because personally, I personally take humic and fulvic acids internally every day, like human consumables, right? Because I know the nutrient density is gone from the food. And I hate to say it, even in some organics, you know, if they're not really, I mean, you can be organic and still not have nutrient dense food. Right. That's a whole nother sector I kind of look at personally. So that's exactly something that, you know, it's great. And I see what you're saying. So like humics, fulvics, those trace minerals, that's what brings nutrient density to food. It's not necessarily obviously macros. It's all the micros.
Correct.
Easiest way to say it.
Well, and protein. I mean, there's an agronomist who's a friend of mine who will remain unnamed because I don't want to get him in trouble. And he was telling me about a conversation he had with a big ag company, and I'm not going to name them because I don't want sued. Okay. So there's 2 degrees.
That's the way this works, man.
I know. But he said, I was talking to this guy from this big ag company, and he casually mentioned that they were testing some of their like old varieties, like they were doing grain nutrient testing on some of their varieties from like the 80s. And he's like, you know, back then it had like 9-10% protein, and the stuff we're pulling now is like 7% protein. And he just said it like it was no big deal. Like, yeah, this is an interesting observation we've made scientifically. Like, guys, that's like a 20 to 30% reduction in protein. Like what are we doing? Like that's not like no big deal. It
doesn't sound a lot when you say a few percent, but when you do the math, it's like holy moly.
Yeah. So so it's, you know, passively like, no big deal. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's a significant reduction in protein. That's not great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Perfect. Yeah. So, you know, I like your stance on it. I like all of that, basically saying like, let's test when they're in there, the post-harvest removal, nutrient takeoff. You know, a lot of people don't look at it like that. That's great. You kind of mentioned earlier about biological tools. And you're like, hey, man, I'm not big on bugs in a jug and things like that. If you were to take a biological, I guess that's the easiest way I should say it, because you don't develop them, you know, you don't do anything like that. I doubt you suggest them very often, to tell you the truth. But if you were to, the bio tools, litmus test, like let's look at this. If you were to take one, before you take a biological tool to a grower, what would you want to see? the mode of action? Like, what would you want to see true? The
Sure.
mode of action, independent data, stability, economics. Like, if there were to be one that you were to be like, yeah, we do need to utilize this because we're low on, certain bacteria or fungi in soil, whatever that looks like.
Sure.
What would be that litmus test that you would probably give it?
There's a couple different things. So I really like the idea of the independent science first and foremost. And I get frustrated when companies won't submit to even like a Beck's PFR, practical farm research, or a university or whatever, right? Like, I understand, I get the bias against sending it to the university, and I can get into the how statistics work and all that a little bit later if you want to. So like, I get that, but at least something like Beck's, it's an independent third party. They don't care if you succeed or fail; they're going to publish the data. And I don't send everything to Beck's. Like, I'm working on developing these amino acid products. I'm not going to send them there until I'm sure that they work. You know what I mean? Like, I want to make, like,
That's
I
fair.
got to run it through me first. But if you will not submit your stuff for independent testing, it's like, why not? Like, that is a little bit of a red flag to me. And if the argument is like, well, they won't do it right. Okay, well, like, call them and be like, hey, here's how you have to do this. I don't know. I just feel like that's always at the very least like a beige flag where, yeah. So I like independent data. I like reading claims, right? Because here's the thing. I can tell you that if you're looking at something like a seed treatment, like a biological seed treatment, that is your number one highest probability of success, because what are we trying to impact? And I can name 3 off the top of my head that I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that they work. Okay. But they are seed treatments, right? And these are not like insecticides, fungicides, the FNI, that kind of deal. Like, this is the stuff to help promote growth, or the growth promoting, what do they call that? PGPR. Anyway, but it's like, because you're not trying to make such a big claim. So like, we know that actually, here, hold on, look at this. Let me show you something. So I'm trying to find the book. I've got a book over here called Advances in Seed Priming, and I can't find it right now. But this book, there it is, right? Okay. Sorry. I'm a nerd, right? I like my books. Okay. Advances in Seed Priming. Yeah. So stuff like this talks about, like, when you try and impact a smaller area, you have a greater likelihood of success for the reasons we talked about earlier. So, and I like what you said too about like the photosynthesis on the leaves. Like, that makes sense to me, because we're trying to, I would absolutely say, hey guys, why don't we take a look at this? And that's the other thing is, like, when I'm working with a grower, it's like, you should go test 10 acres of this, because the only data that ultimately matters is the data from your farm. Don't go do it on every acre. And this is where I start to step on the grower's toes. Guys, so much on-farm data is so worthless. Like, you can't go test half an 80 versus the other half of the 80. That's field variation. You got to do strips throughout the field. Okay. So like, there has to be this balance between like the way the university do it with the small blocks versus the way that farmers do it, which, you know what? I tested not at all, because I just put it on the whole field, but I felt like, I'm like, I don't care what you felt like. I'm too much of a scientist for that. And I'm sorry. Like, you can't compare this year to last year to the neighbor down the road. Like, that doesn't work. So it's like, Let's test it on the farm. Even if the claim is kind of bogus, it's probably still worth testing on 5 to 10 acres if you can get it in a small quantity and see what works, because some places have biology that will work on some farms that won't work on others. And as much as I will absolutely rant and rave and say it's on the company to figure that out, and it should be on the company to figure that out. Sometimes
before they market it, right? So they don't lie and just sell things to farmers that waste money.
Yes.
That's where I'm at with it, at least, right?
Yes, but I mean, guys, I can put you in touch with farmers. Like, I could fill a room and divide it right down the middle between farmers that have tried this same product, and this half of the room will say doesn't work for crap, couldn't get it to work anywhere, and this half of the room will like, I will die on this hill, I'm putting it on every acre because of what we've seen with it. And it's the same product. So like, you can't say it doesn't work because this half knows that it works, but you also can't say that it works everywhere because this half knows that it doesn't work. And like,
that's a 50-50 split at that point, right? It's like, so does it or doesn't it? And I sometimes think also some of that litmus test, a lot of people test it in a controlled environment, right? Like, let's do it in greenhouses. Let's do it in a lab. And theoretically this should work. But when you actually put it in field, in actual true soil ecology, does it work? And Correct. You know what? And I agree with you 100% too. Like, if you're not willing to submit the product to an independent study and then stand behind that, whether it works or it doesn't, that's a huge, and when you say a beige flag, I don't know, that's red if you ask me, right? Like, because that's at the end of the day, I mean, that's like the first step of saying, hey, you know what? I'm confident that this is going to work in California all the way to Maine, right? Like, it doesn't matter what the soil type is, whether it's clay, salty, you name it, it's going to work. And if you're not willing to do that and have a third party look at your, your product or whatever that is, that's a very, very good point you made. You have to have that, because they're holding their hands up like, hey, I'm not making money. I just want to do the testing. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. Like, it's black and white pretty much, unless you mess the test up, and then that's your fault, like you said. right? You should have told them how
Yeah.
the test should have been done and the things that should have been looked at. So that's fair.
And the other thing I have to say that rubs me the wrong way with farmers, because this is a bad practice too, guys. I'm just calling you out and tell it like it is if you have something and it doesn't work year one and you're like, snake oil, never using it again. Or alternatively, if you have something and it works year one, you're like, every acre I'm going, like, those are both not ideal. Okay. So, because like
Yes.
in a perfect world, right, you'd get something to work 8 out of 10 years. So at the, I think a good litmus test is 3 years. If it works 2 out of the 3, like that's 67%. So that's still way better than a coin flip. And that's still probably a good way to test it. So if you get something that works 2 years in a row, then by all means, go whole hog, put it all over the farm. No doubt about it. But just because something doesn't work one year doesn't mean it's not going to work the next two. It just means maybe the conditions weren't right for that. And then, like you said, what works in a lab doesn't necessarily work on the farm. We need to see what those real world conditions are like.
Absolutely. And that's what we've seen all of these years, especially when we've really focused on biology since 2000. And it's these companies, or a lot of companies coming out and saying, oh, I got the next best biological, and it worked in a lab, it worked in controlled, you put it in the field, and it's like, I'm not seeing it. Or there's companies out there now, and I'm not going to name any, but they're genetically modifying organisms, which I'm against that 100%, due to the fact that, God put things here for a reason. That's my belief. And there's certain soil ecologies that don't need to be messed with, especially with genetically modified organisms, and some that die off at the end of each year. And that goes back to that same model of just profit. It's all driven for profit, right? Like, let me sell you something, and then let me come back and sell you something at the end of next year, or whatever that looks like. So that's kind of where my take is on it.
I got to be honest, Brandon, I watched one of your YouTube videos recently, and it was really challenging. Like I wanted to bring this up. So you did a video the other day that you released on, are the products that we're using things that are going to be a long-term fix or a short-term fix where they can just sell it to you year after year. And I'll be honest, that was challenging for me personally. And I really had to sit down and think about that and do some soul searching, because our model is, Silica is a deal that comes out year after year. But I will say this, I am the biggest proponent of manure that you're going to meet, because I think that manure covers a lot of sins and it fixes a lot of problems. Green cover crops, same thing, right? Like in my perfect world, you would do manure and no-till and cover crops, and like you would go back to a full regenerative deal. And in those scenarios, I believe that you are building that stress tolerance and stress resistance in there to the point where if you're a full-on regenerative scenario, I don't think my product is going to work there. So I feel like after I did this soul search, and I wanted to tell you this too personally, I'm going to keep promoting that to guys, that like I want to push them that direction. For me, this is a bridge to get there. And some guys 100%. Will never, ever do it. And you can never. And I'm like, you know what? For those guys that can't or won't integrate livestock, cover crops, no-till, whatever, or reduced tillage, I should say, like I will be their solution. I will sell them products every year because they are in an environment and they are continuing to create an environment where they're going to create their own stressors. Absolutely.
Yep. So and you have to help them, right? Like, so, yeah, and I look at that as well. And I'm not against that either, due to the fact that, you know what, if you can help them bridge that gap or help them actually get more yield, keep their tractors, keep their farms. Like, I mean, that's getting down to the nitty gritty, but that's the truth of it. Keep their buildings, their family farms. That's something that on the flip side of that, if they're never willing to change, or they just can't, right? Like that's another portion that you do look at, and some people just can't do it. It's funny. We had another gentleman on yesterday. They're taking a commercial farm and they are literally turning it over into a regenerative farm, 100%. It's 600 acres. And It's not just, we're going to do this. No, it's the family that owns it and things like that. They do have other resources, right? Oil.
Right.
You have, businesses, you have different things that's going to allow that transition to happen. Where some people, it's the only business they have is their agricultural business. And if you can mitigate that or help those guys get more yield, put more money in the farmer's pocket. Like obviously they have to give you money to buy your product. But the reality is if you're putting more money in their pocket, you're solving a problem for them. And that's a great thing, whether it's year over year, and I'm not against that either. If it's year over year and you're just trying to help them do better, hey man, that's good.
Well, and one of my most popular TikTok videos that I've done, I started out with, I said, the farmer has to get an ROI or it doesn't matter. And this is one of the things that just makes me crazy about big ag and the fall soil testing and the selling you more fertility. Guys, look, this is not a secret. Okay. It's not even they don't even try and hide this. If your soil test levels, and this is the fall soil test, like we said, are medium to high in phos, you're not going to get a response to phosphorus. I don't care if it's in furrow high quality fertilizer. I don't care if it's 2x2. I do not care if it's broadcast fertility. You've hit the point where you're not going to get a response to that. So then I'm like, well, okay, well, why are we putting phos out there then? Well, the only reason is because we're afraid of mining the soils. Okay, let's talk about that real quick. This idea of mining our soils. That phrase has a verb in it, mining, which means what does that relate to? It's mining the mines. Guys, and this is from, I'm using Marshner's Mineral Nutrition of Higher Plants right now as a sun shield so that I'm not getting like a glare on my screen here. But this is page 158 of Marshner's. It's like the Agronomy Bible for those of you who aren't familiar with this. So this is on page 158. It says most of the phosphate that is used in fertilizers is derived from rock phosphate, which is a non-renewable resource. Global phosphate resources are predicted to be depleted within the next 50 to 100 years in an era when more pea fertilizers are needed to produce more food and more fiber to sustain a growing global population. Guys, putting out like broadcast fertility, it's not a sustainable practice. Those mines will eventually run dry. You know what is a sustainable practice? Reintegrating livestock into our farming operations, because it's going in one end, it's going out the other end, and that's nutrient cycling. Are we removing grain? Yes, we are absolutely removing some nutrients when this comes off the field, right? But there are hundreds, if not thousands of pounds in our soils. And we are going to deplete those a lot less rapidly than we are those stupid mines. So the whole system, like I said, is just set up to sell guys stuff. And it makes me flipping crazy because if your levels are already high enough anyway, you're not going to get an ROI by putting that out there. So I tell guys, how about instead, first and foremost, let's save the money that you don't need to spend, right? Just so only put out your removal rate. And then let's take some of that savings from, whoever was in your ear before. And on the spreadsheet that I'm building that we're about to release, it has like 11 different universities: University of Nebraska, Lincoln, University of Kentucky, University of Illinois, Iowa State. And it's even got like Ag PhD and nutrients, like what they have said are here are your removal rates. And so it's simple. All you have to do is punch in your nutrient removal over here and then click on the drop down of who had your ear, who was telling you what you needed before. And then it will spit out, here's how, based on how many acres you have at that, here's how much money you saved. So we can save you that money. Yeah. And then, hey,
that's great. And you're going to be releasing that, you said? You're going to be
free for guys. Yeah, I'll put it up on our website. Yeah. So it's like, why not use your nutrient removal rate and save some money? And then, by the way, let's take some of the money that we saved and reinvest it in something like silica stress-based mitigation or silica stress mitigation, right? So because then we can actually get an ROI. You're talking about
help try to increase those yields and getting even more ROI even from what you're doing. So not only are you going to be cutting money right on fertilizer, but then we're going to be adding something else into it to also increase that producer's ROI.
Yes, it's a reallocation of dollars going from, throwing good money after bad. Or we don't want to do that, right? So stop doing that. And let's invest it in something that has actually been proven to get us an ROI. Year one. I'm not talking about, 5 years down the road. I'm talking about year one, get an ROI. So we're, saving you money on this end and making you money on this end. I don't know. I don't know how this is revolutionary. Like, I don't get why this is such a profound idea, but people freak out when I say this. To me, this is just logical.
Yeah. Like, let's just reallocate and increase profit. Like, that's the reality of it, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Couple of things now. When you say commercialize the science, what qualities as enough to ship and what still needs another season? Like, when you say that, what do you mean exactly?
So everything that I do, I base, just like I told you, this advances in seed priming, okay? I have thousands of dollars of books on this shelf. Thousands of dollars of books. I have, God knows, hundreds, if not thousands of articles that I download. They're these peer-reviewed articles, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm reading everything I can get my hands on. And part of this comes from my PhD, and I took like multiple years of PhD level statistics. And you have to understand just a base knowledge of how statistics work, right? So we can never prove that anything works, because from a statistics standpoint, you would then have to have the entire theoretical population. So like, go with me on this. Every place you could ever potentially try a silica fertilizer. Well, it's not possible to get every place you've ever tried. So any test we're doing is just a sample of that, right? So that's like their base is we can't prove something works. So our working assumption is nothing works. That is the base assumption. And we can disprove that nothing works. We can say, well, look, in this instant, it does work. That's what this whole p-value and rejecting the null hypothesis means. The assumption is nothing works. And we can only say, well, at least in this instance, we found that it did. But that is why the universities are so quick to write off everything as, again, snake oil, foo-foo juice, pixie dust, whatever, because they say, look, we didn't get enough evidence to say that it doesn't work, right? So that's the background from this. So all I do is I go through and I read the science. And when I find something that they're like, hey, this actually might work in this instance, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I better pay attention to this, because we know that they're biased and inherently they want to throw it out. That is the base assumption. So if you find a university that says, hey, there might be something to this, there is absolutely something to this. Okay. So when I build products, what I do is I read all that research, and like right now I'm doing it with the amino acids thing. And it's like, so this amino acid at this time on this crop. And then I build a spreadsheet. Okay. So, and I force myself, this is awful. When you've got ADHD, this is like a grind. Okay. But I actually track, like, here was the rate, here was the crop, here's the study that it came from. And I will try and find, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 studies and line them all up and figure out what was the most common rate. So, if I'm ever sitting on a stand someday to trial and a judge says, you have to give me your formula. None of what we have is patented, because then I have to give the formula away. It's all trade secret, like Coke. But if they ever say, give us your formula, I can say, here is my formula, and here are the 3 studies that this raw material came from. Here are the 2 studies that this raw material came from. Here are the 6 studies that this raw material came from.
And here's the stack of books, right? Here's the stack of books where it's all from. Yes.
But guys, see, here's the stupid thing. Our stuff works so consistently because of that. Like, I'm not that smart. I've just commercialized peer-reviewed science. And so, like, now, as to your point, though, sometimes what worked in a lab doesn't work in the field. So that's just step 1. So step 1 is it's got to be science-based. Step 2 is now we take it out to the field and we try it and we figure out what works, what doesn't, when and where. So like if we have something that, like this year we did I'm working on a planter box treatment. Okay. And it was wildly inconsistent this year. It drove me crazy. So I pay attention to, well, it didn't work here, but it did work here. And then I try and like draw those parameters around. Well, okay, so why did it work here? And then we'll reiterate. Now, I get stuff out to where we'll have 10, 15 site years, which is to say data points, right? So that adds some validity, because it's the equivalent of testing like 10 years worth of data, because it's in these different sites. And then I want to figure out, like, what does it take to get enough to make something worthwhile to do? And my goal always is to get an average return for the farmer of about 3 to 1. Because people are like, how do you price your stuff? Like, I got to figure out if I can build something, but it's break even for the farmer, I will not pursue it. Like, I don't want to, you shouldn't be buying bushels. My goal is always that you should get a 3 to 1. And if you look at like our Pixie Dust Plus, which for the record, we're doing a big rebrand right now. So I'm going to change the language if that's okay. Because the product is not changing at all. Formulation is not changing. I've come to the realization that there's, I think, a psychological barrier for some farmers. They hear snake oil or foo-foo juice or pixie dust and they write it off, right? It's all in that same category.
They're like, oh no, this guy, Dr. Curt, he's just crazy, man. I don't know. Right. Selling me pixie dust.
I'm proud of the branding. Here, in fact, I've got the shirt on underneath. So it says, ask me about pixie dust. And I'm really proud of that branding that we did. But it was a little tongue in cheek, but we're renaming it Sentry, SINTRY, Sentry Silica. And the tagline will be protecting plant performance. Yeah. So, because that's what we're trying to do.
I like it.
Protect photosynthesis. So I don't even remember where I got off track there. ADHD is kicking my butt hard today. But you've got to have the multiple site years to be able to say, hey, this works. And so when I'm building stuff or testing it or whatever, we absolutely try to make sure we have sufficient data to say, hey, let's in confidence to say, hey, this will work in, X locations. Let's take it out there that way.
The replication of it. And I like that idea, commercializing science. And that's a very simple way to do it. It's not like you're trying to sell them something new or develop something new. It's like, here's the science. This is what we know. Let's go ahead and commercialize it and actually make a product that works, that'll return 3 to 1 to the farmer. And that's a win. It's a win for you and your company. It's a win for the producer, the farmer that's going to purchase it from you. And that right there, I feel like that's the main key. If they have to go back and buy year over year, if you can give them a 3 to 1 on their money, anybody in their right mind is going to do it. You know what I mean? Like, and that to me is just, that to me is great, Well,
that's what I was going to say. Sorry, with the Pixie Dust deal. So the Pixie Dust Plus product is going to be called Sentry Foliar. So the Sentry Foliar is Beck's PFR proven at about a 3 to 1 return. And that's independent data. If you start talking to my dealers and our customers, they'll tell you it's closer to 5 or 6 to 1 based on their stuff. But Beck's has tested this in like 9 states. Across all kinds of conditions, and they're still saying it's about a 3 to 1.
They're
return.
Averaging it at 3 to 1 then, or whatever, over those 9 states. That's great. And then is that an organic product? Like, is it OMRI listed, or is it strictly for just for commercial? Like, yeah, you know what? We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to go ahead and go with the guys that are corn, soybeans, like the guys that aren't really growing large acreage, right? Of organic crops.
So I told you, and I mean this, and I'll stand behind it. I will buy organic anytime I can. I do have this tiny little beef with organic and the organic certification. Some of the products I build, I could get certified as an organic pesticide. I don't label anything as a pesticide because the EPA cares about 2 things very deeply. Number 1, the raw materials you use. And I will not build something that uses illegal raw materials. Guys, a lot of companies do this and it makes me furious. like to the point where I almost want to turn them in because they're using illegal materials, the things that are plant growth regulators, pesticides, whatever. Makes me crazy. I will not do that. But even if you're using only fertilizer materials and you start making pesticidal claims, the EPA says you're still a pesticide. Okay.
Absolutely.
So everything we have done is all fertilizer based. And I can tell you that I can take my silica fertilizer, okay, and we use a potassium silicate as the base for that, or as one of the raw materials in that product. And I could get that with very minor tweaks. I could get that labeled as an organic pesticide. And I'm like, it's a fertilizer in commercial ag. Why would it be a pesticide? Because some of these things, like when you look at this book right here, okay, Silica and Plant Disease, silica does some really interesting things, and it does some pesticidal type things. You can make claims about, fungicidal effects, about powdery mildew, white mold, all these things that have been scientifically proven. So I don't make those claims about my product. If I wanted to, we'd be in pesticide land. I could be labeled organic, but I haven't wanted to spend the time or the money to do that. So we've stayed in conventional ag and stayed as a fertilizer.
I like it. Yeah. And and it's funny because we're actually in the process of starting something called the biological beyond organic methodology or certifications at some point, right? Where it's not necessarily going to be necessarily an OMRI label or CDFA label or whatever. It's going to be more so about that nutrient density, about products that, just have clean ingredients in them, that farmers know that if I see that labeling, if I see that on a product, or that certification, then I know that it's, like what the manufacturer's done to just say, hey, look, this is what we're doing. We don't want to know what the makeup is of it other than obviously the stuff that's in it, right? Not each component, but it's more so of just an honesty type of a thing, right? Like, hey, I know that this is the way that this is. This is, it's not, there's not chemicals in it. There's not certain things in it. So I understand what you're saying about that, and it's really funny because there's a company out there right now that they used to sell a fungicide, as an insecticide, fungicide, and biostimulant all in one. And that's the way they market it. It was a FIFRA 25B exempt product. Well, they got themselves in trouble. Well, now it's a fertilizer. It's the same exact product, but it's a fertilizer, and they're selling it now as a fertilizer with the same exact, and it just works, right? I mean, it just works as a insecticide, fungicide, and biostimulant all in one. So I know what you're talking about for sure. So let's go to the next part of this. Okay, if somebody comes to you, a farmer, a farm manager, chief financial officer of a farm, and they say, hey, we can't risk the yield. How do you stage a taper, right? Like a taper of nutrition or whatever that looks like. I know with your products, obviously, you're wanting to give them a 3-to-1 increase, right, on their money. For every dollar spent, they get 3 back, which is a great thing. But if they were to say that we can't risk the yield, how do you stage a taper? Is it zone by zone? What are your rollback rules? Like if you're going to take nutrition away or whatever that is, right? Like we've talked about fertilizer and not putting phosphorus out and, all of these things. Like what's your decision threshold? Like what's your thinking on that?
So first of all, I'm going to say, let's respectfully here. Why is the burden of proof on me? Let's start by doing this. If you want to test my silica product, for instance, right? Let's do 2 different tests here. Let's test my silica product in plot A, but you also have to test your practices that you're already doing, separate from me. Forget that I exist. You also have to test your practices in plot B. Guys, I'm telling you right now, this is another one of my things I'm trying to popularize and make sure people burn this into their brain, okay? If conventional farming practices were subjected to the same level of scrutiny that all of the snake oil products are, they wouldn't be conventional farming practices because they don't work. And I'm talking about your broadcast fertility, this, removal rates, all this other stuff. Again, there are places where it works. If you've got low phos, yes, starter will respond. You will get a response to starter, in low phos environments. But again, I don't care if it's starter. I don't care if it's broadcast. I don't care, whatever it is, test what you're doing. I'm fine with you testing me, but I'm going to put the challenge right back on you. Prove to me that what you were doing also works. And if and when it doesn't, and if and when mine does, well, that's a pretty easy swap on that allocation of dollars now, isn't it? And again, let's just run that test in tandem for a couple years and see what happens. Because guys, we have all I feel like I'm in the matrix here where I'm kind of I woke up, right? We have been so ingrained by big ag. See my previous comment about that life insurance policy, that this is the way we have to do it. And we just don't question them. And the universities, they're set up to poo-poo everything and say, this doesn't really work. The whole system is stacked in favor of transferring wealth from the American farmer to the shareholders of the big ag companies. And if you do not believe me on that, okay, I'm going to put my tinfoil hat here for just a second. If you don't believe me on that, look at who lobbied for the big bailouts, because it wasn't the American farmer. Congratulations. All of y'all listening to the podcast right now get to be the face and the fall guy for the rest of America to be mad and pissed off and blaming you for this big bailout when it was the big ag companies lobbying because they all know that you're leveraged and over leveraged and that they're going to get paid. You're not going to get to keep the money that comes from the bailouts, right? That's going to go through you. You're just a conduit. You are a conduit to take money from the taxpayer and give it back to big ag. The whole system, the cards, the deck is stacked against you. And part of what I'm wanting to do, honestly, if nothing else, is just like preach the good news, right? Let's go evangelize about, let's stop doing it the way that we've been trained. Even if you don't ever touch my Silica products, for the love of God, if you take nothing else away, forget that exists, just go test your conventional farming practices. Just start there and let's see.
And it's so funny you say this too, because this is kind of back in 2008, what opened my eyes is when I really saw the system, what was going on, those types of things, and what was really happening, right? And you look back even further of like when soil testing, I was talking to Lance yesterday with Regen Ag Labs, when, soil testing was developed, why it was developed. It was developed around the same time that fertilizer and the commercialization of fertilizer was developed. And you start looking at all of these things that continuously run together, and it's like, wait a second here. And the saddest part of it, and I think you can agree with me, is you see farms, you see families, and they do everything they can. Some of the farmers, producers, they're some of the hardest workers I've ever seen in my life. And they will work themselves literally to the bone, to death. I mean, generations. And their kids are starting to see this now, right? And their kids are saying, why do I want to farm? I saw my grandpa do it. I saw my dad do it. I saw all these people do it. And at the end of the day, we're still barely afloat, right? And that's the thing. And it's a really sad thing. And it's that shift of money needs to go back into the producers' pockets, into the farms' pockets, make those people excited to do what they do. And the next generations, for good food, nutrient density, like make them excited to go out and get in their tractor every day and go do what they do, or whatever that looks like on their farm, right? If it's a regenerative farm, sit and drink coffee and watch the cows with the collars, whatever that is, right? Yep. Whatever you do, get them excited to do it again,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and guys, honestly, it should be fun. Like, if you're not having fun, what's the point? And this is my ADHD speaking hard, right? But like, if I get bored with something, I'll be honest with you, that was 95% of why I had interest in going to Washington and doing the cannabis thing. Like, I'm a Midwestern farm boy. I grew up on a farm in Iowa in the 80s. It was exactly like you're talking about, right? Like, dad at that time lost almost everything. By the grace of God and a whole lot of hard work, he's gotten it all back, right? Like, he's back to doing row crops. He's back to doing cattle. He's worked his tail off to earn that back. But I walked away from the farm because of exactly what you're talking about, okay? But I am still a Midwestern farm boy at heart. And so we grew up here and, had kids here. The biggest part of why I went to Washington State to go check out the cannabis thing, which for the record, still to this day, never smoked it. Okay. And I'm not talking like the Clinton, I didn't inhale. No, like, I've never smoked it. I was out there because I was bored with corn and beans. I don't want to say conquered because that sounds arrogant, but I can get you to 300 bushel corn most of the time. We can get pretty close to 100 bushel beans most of the time. Adjusting population, doing the fertility, like all those things. It's not that difficult in most of the environments that I've worked with guys in. And I was so bored, right? It wasn't fun anymore. So we went out there and I got to go do this controlled environment thing. And it's like, oh, this is cool. This is fun. But now I was able to take what I learned there and bring it back to commercial ag and start to help everybody, especially in those marginal areas. And I tell guys all the time, I don't want your best acres, right? Like, I want your challenging acres.
That's us too, man. I mean, that's what we want.
Right? Like, give me the tough ground. Yeah.
That's where they make money, right? Yes. Like, that's where the money's made, is in the marginal acres. It's not in the good production. It's like, give me the ones that are the worst. Like, that's where you're able to actually do something. And that's funny you say that too, because, like, same thing, like commercial ag, like we were involved. I mean, and we don't only do organics, right? Like, we actually, when we started in '08, we were actually helping integrate biological systems into commercial agriculture, right? Like, where can we put biology and where can we do things to cut inputs or to readjust, reallocate, kind of like what we were just talking about, right? Reallocation of money in order to make more for a farm. And so, over time, as that went on, a couple of years ago, we were approached by even some giant pumpkin growers, and we helped set, the world record for a giant pumpkin. We worked with a guy, his name's Travis Ginger, and he set the world record. And like, to me, that sparked us again. It's like, man, it's so funny. But when I can we helped him grow a pumpkin, the size of a VW bug, I'm like, that's pretty sweet, man. Like, it gets you excited about doing something, and then what we learned from there, we go back and do it again. But yeah, no, that's perfect. I'm with you on that for sure. I like the idea of what you said, do it your way let's do it my way. Let's go side by side, see who, I don't want to say wins, but let's see who comes out on top, right? Like, let's see this. And then we go from there. So this will be just more of a quick question for you. And I like this always. Top 3 agronomy myths you would retire tomorrow, and the field data you would put in their place, right? So the top 3 agronomy myths.
Well, I think I'm actively working towards these. Okay. So first one would be, removal rates. Obviously,
Perfect.
right? The universe, the big data sets, and I would replace that with your farm data. So often we have all this data on the farm, we don't know what to do with it. What I'm working on here is a pretty darn straightforward thing. So that would be absolutely number one. Let's start with the removal thing. Number 2, I think would be, and this one maybe should even be reprioritized as number 1. Okay, the value of manure. In fact, I got another book here. This one's on this side. So this isn't a book. This is an article, but I printed it and did the nice binding on it. It's called The Non-Nutrient Value of Manure. Guys, we have to stop judging manure based on NPK value alone, because there is carbon, there is biology, and there's a whole lot of other good stuff that happens with manure. And for me, if you want to talk about being regenerative ag and you do not have livestock involved in some capacity, like, my minimum threshold is you got to at least have manure. If you can get the cattle like grazing out there or whatever, even better. Okay. But it is a full stop. You cannot be regenerative without livestock. You just can't, because that is the way that God designed it. Okay. So understanding the value of manure, because I think that if we better understood the value of manure, it would no longer be, well, it's cost prohibitive based on my NPK comparison to my commercial fertilizer, because that is not the right comparison, right? It needs to be, what about the carbon? What about the biology? What about and. So nutrient removal, and manure. And then thirdly, all these revolve around, I think, I want to say fertility, redoing our understanding. I'm not sure how to phrase this, but like revisiting or waking up to the importance of photosynthesis and not just NPK, right? Like the famous study from back in the 1920s, we talk about a plant's dry matter is 95% carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And the NPK, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, boron, and all the micros makes up approximately 5% of what that plant actually is. That's it, right? The carbon, hydrogen, oxygen comes from photosynthesis. It does not come from stuff that we're throwing at the system. So we need to reprioritize. That's maybe what I would say. Reprioritize our understanding of which fertility matters, and focus on photosynthesis more and less on chemical inputs.
I love it. And that last one with photosynthesis, it's so funny because we look at it the same way, right? The farmer that can take in more photosynthesis or more energy from the sun is going to be the guy that wins always. Right? Like if he can capture more energy, light energy, he will win. And we were actually doing some stuff on it, just doing a little research on it the other day. And you look at like how many horsepower is over an acre of ground in energy. And that's photosynthesis, that's light energy, that's those things. And you're talking, if that sun was, square up 12 o'clock noon all day long, it's like 5,000. And I don't know the exact, I wish I had the paper up, but it was 5,420 horsepower or something over 1 acre of ground. And then you start looking at it and like the average, and it's something I think that you'll be able to probably geek out on and look into, and you'll be like, holy moly, like that's a good point. It's like 1,300 horsepower over a day. You look at British thermal units and you start breaking that light energy down, and then the photosynthesis that those plants can take in, right? Like it's the light energy, it's the photosynthesis. So whoever can capture more of that free energy, which is the only thing I feel like at this point in time that's free in life, right? Is like the sun, right? Like the solar energy is the one thing, it's not taxed, it's free. If you can take in more of it, you're going to end up winning, right? Yes. So I love that. Definitely, I agree with you on that. I'll just say, where are we headed in ag today now? And now that we went through this, is a little bit of a myth bust. Where are we headed in ag? I say biological ag because that's kind of like what we're looking at. We really look at the soil microbes. We look at the life of the soil. Obviously, other inputs like silica, things like that are going to help those crops. Where do you see us headed?
I think that I don't know how much of this is a change, really. I think guys need to look at guys like yourself, right? Like that actually clearly care about figuring out the biological component. So like I said, I certainly don't want to lump you in with everybody else, because there are some good companies out there. And TerraMax is another one. I love TerraMax up in Minnesota. I'm not affiliated with them, but I'm telling you, they're good eggs based on what I've seen. Their stuff is also submitted independent third-party data, right? So there are some good ones out there. So sort through the weeds, right? Like separate the wheat from the chaff, and find the guys like you that care about understanding. This is not a guarantee. Like, I'm sure, Brandon, that somebody could go buy a product from you and have it not work 1 year. But the difference is going to be you care enough to try and figure out why and how to help make that better, like the next year, right? Like
That's
so
right.
many of these companies, like you said, that are just popping up. It's like that didn't work. And instead of trying to figure it out and come back to the farm next year, they're just going to move to the neighbor and get the neighbor to try it instead and hope to God that it works better. So like go to companies with low turnover. And that's one of the things I'm proud of is we have a crazy, crazy high amount of customer retention. Like it's so much more expensive to find new customers than it is to just retain the customers you have. Like just take care of people, right? Focus on that relationship. But I do think that more and more, I'm hoping anyway, with the rise of social media, guys can share their experiences on stuff like that. And we can separate the wheat from the chaff maybe a little bit faster. And the companies that are just wanting to get out there and get margin and jump into the biological space, that those will kind of be weeded out a little bit more quickly. That would be my hope anyway. And that more and more guys like us will come out and challenge the system and challenge the status quo. I do think this younger generation of farmers are coming up seems to be a lot more, there's more of them that are willing to say, hey, that just because that's the way we've always done it doesn't mean that that's the way that it has to be in the future. And there's always been, when I started in ag, I was in my like 20s and everybody taking over the farms was in their 40s to 50s. Well, now I'm in my 40s and the guys that are taking over the farms are still in their 40s to 50s. So like, instead of trying to like talk to these guys that are older and have more experience now, we're kind of on the same page. But I'm noticing that like, it's a much larger group of people than what it used to be. Even though the age hasn't changed, the willingness to adopt new practices seems to be growing among farmers. And I'm very hopeful for that.
Yeah, no, and I have to agree with you 100% on that. We're starting to see that same shift. And I think it's a really important thing as we see it as well. I think it's headed in a direction where there are starting to be questions, right? There are starting to be these things that come out and be like, that doesn't quite make sense. Why am I continuously doing this same thing? And it's a really hard thing because it's social pressure. There's all kinds of different things that are kind of like intertwined into that, I feel like, especially since they're changing grandpa's recipe, right? Like that's the easiest way I can say it. Like you don't change grandma's recipe. Like that she has a recipe for soup, you don't change it, right? You change that, you're done, right? Like potentially out the family, like you don't know what's going to happen. And it's kind of the same thing in farming and what we've noticed over all these years, right? Like this is the way my dad did it. This is the way we did it. And this is the way they were taught. And I don't know if it was they were taught that way or if they were sold that way. And I say that, very loose cheeked, but that's the reality, right? Fertilizer salesmen, like people involved in like pushing it that direction. Whereas now the newer generations are starting to come up and say, wait a second here. You know what? Maybe we can change this recipe and be more profitable. Maybe we can change this recipe and do something different. Maybe we farm less acres, but we're more profitable on those acres. It's all those different things that happen that we're starting to see as well. So I think that's great. Now, just another quick question, then we'll start wrapping this thing up. If you had just 1 week, and maybe it would take longer than that, right? But with a small budget, 1 week, what is the lowest risk change a grower can make, would you say? And one indicator that would prove it would work. And 1 week might be too short, especially with the research and things like that you do. But what would something like that be? Like one small change they could make?
So for me, 1 week would be too short because ultimately what I care about is I care about getting the grower an ROI. And there's no way of knowing that until the growing season's over, right? For sure.
I like
But
it.
if you want to say like visual changes or whatever, sure. The biggest thing I would say, the lowest hanging fruit that a lot of people have adopted, but there's still a lot of people yet to adopt it. I would say look at doing something like lowering your soybean population. I'm going to focus, again, I'm Midwest. I know you're in Colorado, but this is to me the easiest thing, right? Lower soybean populations. If you're at 140 or above, cut that. Like your final stand needs to be 80 to 100,000, like no more than that. And this is based on a ton of guys that I've worked with over big acres. 80 to 100,000 final stand is just really where you need to be. Do that and inoculate them very, very well. Inoculant is cheap. Get a really good inoculant, something that has like a a Brady Rhizobium japonicum, because that's native to the soil where they come from. So a good inoculant. Pair that with, we have another product called Powder Keg, which is a seed germination aid. Works very symbiotically with biology. We've seen that with numerous companies. I can tell you it pairs well like with Conklin's Magnify LST, VW Fusion's Myronoc ST. Even Pivot Bio has tested us and seen that like they're hopefully moving to field testing because they've already seen that the compatibility is there. So we have several companies that we know that pairs well with. I wouldn't call it a food source, but again, it's like an inexpensive insurance policy. So go with a really good inoculant, lower those populations, and then I would come back early vegetative growth and use our what's going to be called Century Foliar. That's the one that's again the Bex PFR proven product, because that's the one where we're like 3-to-1 ROI. And you will see a lot of times you'll see a visual difference. Guys tell me, hey, look, it looks greener, it looks bushier, it looks like in a week, like you'll see a visual difference. I don't care about that per se, because again, I want an ROI, and I don't care if I make it look better if it doesn't get you an ROI. But a lot of guys tell me that they see that anyway. So soybean acres, that's a really, really easy change. If you're not farming
I like
soybeans or
that.
doing whatever, I think the easiest thing then is go test your grain. Stop basing your fertility recommendations on what the university says is an average of a big data set, and base it on your own data from your own farm. And that one's a really easy deal, and that would only take a week.
Absolutely. No. And I also like that with the soybeans, right? And that plant population's a big deal because, sometimes you get too many plants out there. I mean, it was the same even in hemp, and you can attest to that probably when the huge hemp industry came through, right? And everybody wanted to pack the plants in, and nobody really knew how many hemp plants to put out, even on that, right? And then as they started to realize, well, we can put less plants out and our yields are going up. Like there's certain just little things that happen. So that's great. Definitely, I just appreciate you, Curt, being here with us today. Just your expertise, your wisdom, your outlook on things, the research backed, the actual truth, right? Really wanting to help producers and farmers and things like that, not just to do it for a profit for Alchemy Biosciences or for Dynamite Ag or, to make you a wealthier person or whatever that may be, but actually because you care about it. you know, for the audience of Soil Talks podcast, what's the easiest way they could contact you? I mean, is it telephone, email, social media? Like, if you could just let everybody know what's the easiest way to contact, that would be great.
Yeah. So you can email. I'm really bad at email, and there's a really good chance it's going to get lost if you do this. Okay. So our website, you can go to alchemybioscience.com, and you can see it here underneath my name, alchemybioscience.com, and you can email me from there. We've got information up there. You can contact us as well. Best thing, honestly, is either call or text, because I'm really responsive to call or text. My cell phone is 641-919-5574. And then follow me on TikTok. I don't do anything anymore on Facebook or Twitter, X, or whatever you want to call it. All of the socials that I focus on now is just TikTok, because that's where I find that we find the most progressive farmers who are willing to try stuff. So, and it's at Alchemy Bioscience on TikTok.
Great. Thanks a lot. Yeah, no, we appreciate it. Again, thank you so much for being with us, taking time out of your day. It's a busy day. I know we talked a little bit earlier. You got another side hustle, coffee shop, which is really cool. You know what I mean? And so we just appreciate you taking your time out of your day, talking with us about this on the Soil Talks podcast. If you guys would please follow the podcast, follow the channel, keep an eye for us. We're going to have more and more people coming on here like Dr. Curt, not just what's out there currently, but we're getting into the real nitty gritty, finding the best people we can to really help the agricultural industry move forward. So we just, again, thank you very much, Dr. Curt. We hope you have a great day, and we look forward to doing another one with you soon. Have a Merry Christmas, Curt.
You too.
Take care. All right.